Welcome to the 16th message of our series, Live in Grace, which is part 2 of our study of the life of David. This week, we're looking at the two pictures the Bible gives us of the end of David's life, and we see the importance of living life with the end in mind.
Well, let me start by asking a question. What do you want the end of your life to look like? What do you want to be known for? In your last days, do you want to be alone, or do you want to be surrounded by family and friends? And what do you want those who are closest to you to say about you? I think the thing is too often we don't ask that question, and as a result, we make decisions based on what feels right at the moment, without taking into consideration how the decisions that we make in that moment can have a devastating long-term impact. The temptation is only to look at how that might impact us in the short run, and we fail how it may destroy our lifelong goals. So think about this, when our family relationships. For example, no one when they get married, they say, well, my goal is to end up divorced and really resent each other after a couple of years. No, everybody when they get married, they say, our goal is to have a long-term relationship that stands the test of time, that 50 or 60 years from now we'll still be in love. But why is it that while everyone theoretically has that as the goal, so many marriages end up on the rocks? And I think a lot of it is because we fall into the trap of making short-term decisions that feel right at the moment that often undermine the long-term health of that relationship. Or when we think about becoming parents, no one becomes a parent and say, boy, we've got this beautiful child. It's my hope that they become rebellious and they grow up to really resent me and stay far away from me. Nobody wants that. But yet, unfortunately, that's where too many families end up. Because again, I think often we make short-term decisions that feel right at the moment, and we don't think about what our long-term goals are and how the decisions move us toward or away from those long-term goals. Now, this isn't by any means a new problem. It's a problem that has been true ever since Adam and Eve ate the apple. And we're going to see this morning, it's a problem that haunted even heroes of the Bible like King David. While too often we can live for the moment, what really matters isn't the happiness that we would have at the moment. There are things that really do matter. Things like the health of our relationships, the heritage that we leave for our kids. And so we've got to think about those things. Now, we're going to take a little different approach this morning, and we're going to look at two different passages about the life of David. And as we do that, so it's important to understand that when we look at the Bible, and when we study not only the account of David, but of any story of the Bible, it always seeks to do more than just tell us the story. You see, it's not trying to tell us a history of here's exactly what happened. It's not trying to write a biography of telling us the story. It's always trying to teach spiritual truths through the selective telling of that story. See, what we have in the Bible is always 100% true. But God's purpose was never to try to tell us 100% of the story. God has given us the story of David and the story of all the characters in the Bible by a means which he seeks to teach us his divine message about spiritual truths through the accurate, but not the exhaustive, the accurate, divinely telling of those accounts. Now, one of the things that's interesting now as we come toward the end of our study of David is that when you look at David, we've been looking primarily at the story in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but actually there's two places where David's story is told. Not only in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but also in 1st Chronicles. And what's really interesting in that is that both of these writers, writing by the leading of the Holy Spirit, choose to end the story by giving a picture of the end of David's life. But the two scenes tell very, very different stories, two different messages. You see, they're both true. They're both part of David's story, but they're both part. And both of them focus on something to teach us a spiritual truth. Both present an accurate picture of David at the end of his life, but they're describing different parts of his life and different parts of the legacy, different things that his family followed. One is very positive. We're going to see in a couple minutes in 2 Corinthians or 1 Chronicles 28. It's a very positive statement about his legacy of how he lived for a transcendent purpose, and he gave that example to his son to follow. But first we're going to look this morning at the picture of David in 1 Kings chapter 1. And we're going to see that, this is in many ways, it's really the conclusion of what we've been studying in 1 and 2 Samuel. It's the last scene from that telling of David's life. And what we see there is it's actually a tragic story. See, we've seen in our study of David's life that he was one of the most powerful, successful, and loved kings in all of Israel's history. When the Bible tells us, in this story particularly, that while he was loved by the public, at the end of his life, he wasn't really loved by his family. 1 Kings 1 tells us that at the end of his life, he was actually lonely. He was abandoned by his family, all of whom were far more concerned with fighting over the scraps of his kingdom and getting position after he died than they were about being there for David in his last days. To put another way, he had been incredibly successful as a king. But the success that he had as a king was outdone by his failure as a parent, as a husband. Outdone really by the failure in the things that mattered the most. You see, one of the things that we've seen again in our study of the life of David is that he allowed his family relationships to be defined by the values of his culture rather than the teaching of God. Going back to the very beginning of creation, God gave us teaching about how families are to be built. And what does he say? Genesis chapter 2, at the very beginning, when he created man and woman, he tells us, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That God's design is that you would have one man be joined together in marriage with one woman. The two would become one flesh in a lifelong commitment. That was God's design. But the moral values of David's culture taught a different story. They taught that if you're a powerful man, then a powerful man should have multiple wives, because that shows how powerful you are. It shows how accomplished you are. So if you're really powerful, the more wives you have, the more powerful you are. And what happened is, unfortunately, is that David ignored God's design and lived his life based on the morality that was accepted by his culture. And the problem is that in David's day, as is true in our day, the fact that the culture accepts something as true doesn't change the reality of God's design. It doesn't change the way that the world is built. It doesn't change God's opinion on the matter. And anytime we go against God's morality or God's design, what's going to happen is it will always lead to brokenness. It did in David's day, and it does in our day as well. And so what you see here is you see David really reaping the harvest of ignoring God's design over the course of his life. Because he ignored God's design, the result was brokenness and dysfunction in his family. And this is the last picture that we see of his life in 1 Kings chapter 1. It's the long-term effects of ignoring God's design, of ignoring God's morality. But let's look to the first couple verses of 1 Kings 1. If you have your Bible there, and again, I'll acknowledge you'll read this and right away you'll be like, what in the world is that saying? It's one of those passages that it's hard to figure out until you get it, and then it's really clear. So if you have your Bibles, 1 Kings 1:1. King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servants said to him, let a young woman be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms, that my lord the king may be warm. So they sought a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishai the Shemite, and brought her to the king. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was in the service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not, which basically means he didn't sleep with her, didn't have sex with her. And you sit there and you say, what in the world is that? And it's tempting to just skip over that until you remember, this is the beginning of 1 Kings. It is put in a position of highlight. It's put in a position where it's saying, notice this. It's teaching us something. And when you look at that and you say, what is it teaching us then? Well, let me ask you a couple of questions just to think it through. All right, let's say for a normal person, an average person, if you got to the point where you became old and feeble and you had trouble keeping warm, who would you expect to be there to care for that person? Yeah, your wife, your spouse. You'd expect not only the spouse to be there, but you'd expect the family to be there, the kids. And now David, you think, man, he's got, somebody said, well, if his wife died, he's got, number one, multiple wives, and not only that, but we know from what comes right after that a number of them are alive. So you would expect that. But where is his family? Where is Bathsheba? Where is Abigail? Why aren't they keeping him warm? And that's the first question you got to ask. And then if you ask that question and you continue on throughout the rest of 1 Kings 1, what you find is that it tells us where they're at. The rest of his family, his wives and his kids, they're all out there fighting over the position of who's going to be in power after David dies. They don't care about David. They care about what they can get from him. And they've got to hire this girl to come lie in bed with him. And again, verse 4 says it's not about sex, it's not that, it's just he wants to stay warm. And they have to do it. Why? Because the people that should be doing it don't care about him enough to actually do that. His wives, it's not one, it's nobody cared about him that much. I remember even, understanding this, and I talked to my wife Sandy about this passage, and I told her, I said, when I'm old, and I'm ailing, I want my family to be around my bedside. I don't want them to be out there fighting for position and what they can get. I want them to be with me. And I told her, and if I'm cold, I want you to be there to warm me up. I don't want you to have to hire somebody to come and keep me warm. And she looked at me and she said, I promise you I will not hire a young woman to come lie in bed. I'm not sure how to read that, but you know what I'm not getting. I'm not sure what I'm getting at. But you look at this whole picture and you see this tragic scene of David's life. I mean, here you have a loved king by everyone but his family. And you say, why is this the case? Well, because he disregarded God's plan. He said, well, this looks good. And he built his family based on the values of the culture rather than God. And he made decisions that felt good at the moment. Oh, yeah, I have another wife. Why not? And they felt good. They looked good. But they were not the decisions that would build the long-term goal of having the loving family that anyone would desire to have. Unfortunately, the negative effects of David's bad decisions didn't end there. Because it's not just that here you have this man who's dying in a sense of lonely and abandoned by family, but you see the effects impacted his children as well. Because he passed down this heritage, this example of moral failure within the family. Some of this you see if just looking at the couple verses right after this. If you look at verses 5 and 6 of 1 Kings 1. In fact, if you look at the whole passage, it's really clear that David had explicitly said before this that he wants Solomon to be the son that would succeed him as king. But look at what we read in verse 5. Now, and the one son, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. His father had never any time displeased him by asking, why have you done this and so? He was also a very handsome man and been born next to Absalom. So you have this one son who knows that David had said, Solomon is my choice to be king. But he doesn't care. Well, David's weak, and so I can take advantage of that. And what you see is David not making the hard decisions. He's not making the decisions that are going to say, okay, how do I risk this and tell him stop? No. But he said, what's easiest at the moment? He's making short-term decisions that are leading to long-term crisis. And not only that, because of the lack of relationship to that, you have the son that is just, totally doesn't care about his dad's wishes. And while dad's dying, it's okay, now that dad's weak, how do I care for him? Now that dad's weak, how do I take advantage of him? How do I get what I want? Now the rest of the chapter tells us about Solomon actually becoming king. But then even then, if you were to read all of 1 Kings, you read that in the story of Solomon's reign, Solomon did many things right. There were things that he did that he learned from David. We're going to even see one of those in a moment, that he followed David's example positively. But David's negative example, his negative heritage, was failure in the context of the family. And what you find is that Solomon followed David's negative example. He followed the heritage of moral failure. That his story was marrying multiple wives, just like his dad did. Compromising away from God's design. And because of that, these wives led him away from God, and ultimately his kingdom didn't last. We've got to realize that our kids will always learn from your example. Even on little things. I remember a number of years ago, we had gone to this area in Gatlinburg, in this one park, and I went to buy tickets, and the ticket seller looked at our kids, and he said, well, how old are they? Anybody under 12? It was a third of the price. And I looked at my kids, and my boys had just turned 12, and my girls, they're all tinier, they're under 5 foot and under. And so they could all pass for younger. And I looked at them, and she looked at me again, and she said, well, if you tell me that they're all 12 or under 12, they're only a third of the price. And now it's tempting, because I'm sitting there saying, well, you've got 6 people, and full price is a whole lot more expensive. And so it's tempting, and she's basically told me, go ahead and do that, I'll believe it. But I've also looked at that and I said, what am I telling my kids? And I said, no, well, she's 15 or 16 and she's 14 and they just turned 12. And she looked at me and she said, you could have saved a lot of money by just telling me they're all under 12. And I thought, yes, I could have saved some money, but I would have undone a whole lot of teaching that I've done to my kids about what it means to be honest. Because they're watching. They're watching everything that I do. They're watching everything that I say. It has been said that children may close their ears to our advice, but they keep their eyes open to our example. Put another way, when it comes to teaching our children, our example screams so loudly that they will not be able to hear our words. It's not what we say, it's what we do. That's what they see. And we need to realize that we will leave a heritage for our family about who we are. And when it comes to this, they'll remember about not what we taught them, what we said, what we taught them by what we did, what we modeled. And so what are we modeling? And are we modeling a commitment to worship, a commitment to God? Are we modeling that is really what's most important to us? Are we modeling a commitment to God's principles, to living on biblical values? Are we modeling a commitment to parenting, to family? So let me just take one area that really kind of hit on, because it's talking about this whole issue of long-term thinking and family and where you see David compromising. An area that I think that we need to be faithful to, and I think I'm going to say that we need to be faithful living with a heroic vision of what's right and what's wrong. Remember, David's failure was he accepted the moral values of his culture rather than to live by the moral truths of God's Word, especially when it came to God's plan within marriage. God's plan from the very beginning of creation has always been that a family is comprised of one man and one woman who join together in marriage, where the two become one flesh in a lifelong commitment to marriage. But that isn't how our culture views marriage anymore. Our culture tells us that, you commit to that, but then if you get unhappy, if they're not meeting your needs, well just, get out and find someone else who will meet your needs. Find someone else that will make you happy, because you deserve that. You deserve someone who's going to give you the happiness that you deserve. Jesus' story of David. It might seem to be the path of pleasure in the short run, but in reality, if we take that path, it seems better now. It seems to make sense. It destroys our long-term desires that we would have for our life. And it's not only devastating to us as far as our future of not having that vision of what we would hope for at the end of our life. It's devastating to our kids, because they're going to have to live with that decision for the rest of their lives. And someone will say, do you think I should stay in my marriage and be miserable? And my answer is, no, I don't think you should stay in your marriage and be miserable. I think you should stay in your marriage and recommit yourself to doing everything you can do to build a good marriage. Because even if you're miserable now, the fact is that God is able to work in people's lives to redeem and to change and to bring hope out of brokenness. And that might mean going through some times that seem pretty miserable. Where you don't feel that love for your spouse, where they're not making you happy, where you feel like that your needs for intimacy aren't being met. And you're doing it not out of desire or out of feeling, but you're doing it out of obedience to God. But your goal isn't misery. Your goal is a God-honoring marriage that will honor Him, that will provide for your children, and that will move you toward what your goal has always been in the long run. And you know what? If you're faithful with that, in time, God will give the joys and the healing in the marriage that come with that work. Now you say, why do you say heroic? Because in a sense, there's a heroic part of this, of saying that we realize that our culture's problem is that it's all about you. If you're not happy, well, do what makes you happy. And you know what heroism is? Heroism is to say, it's not about me. That I make decisions that realize that at times I'm willing to sacrifice my own happiness for something bigger, for a bigger commitment, for a bigger purpose, a bigger cause. Some of you know, one of my favorite movies is the movie The Lord of the Rings. And one of the reasons that I love it, it's not all about the special effects, it's about the meaning, it's about significance, it's about the heroism that is there. There's one scene near the end of the movie where you see something about heroic commitment that I think speaks to the issue that we're talking about today. You have Frodo, who's made this commitment to carry the ring, and he realizes that this is too hard, and so he's going to go do it by himself. But Sam has made a commitment to be with him. Here's what happens.
Sam.
Go back, Sam! I'm going to Mordor alone.
Of course you are. And I'm coming with you!
You can't swim! Sam! Sam! I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. I don't mean to.
And I love that. And it's so applicable what we're talking about. I mean, why is it that stories like that have been loved for decades? Because it's seen as a great story of heroism and commitment. He's not going out there and saying, I'm not going to give up because I think ultimately things are going to get better and I'm going to be happy. He sits there and says, I know that this might lead to my death, but I made a promise. I made a promise, and he told me, don't leave him. And you know what? He's made a promise before God, and God looks at us and says, don't leave him, don't leave her. And the fact is, are we going to take that as seriously as he does? And we look at that and you say, that's a great promise, that's a great story of heroism. And it's something that has been told over the years. And you know what? I want my story to be a story that my kids will tell. Not of, oh, well, they were happy and he jumped out here and then this, and found this. But that my kids would be able to say, yes, I know it wasn't easy, I know it was good, but you know what? My dad and my mom, they stayed with it. They're heroes in part because they stayed with it. They were committed to each other, that they persevered. And that's a story of heroism. I hope that my kids can not only tell about me, but that as they tell about me, that they then follow in their own lives as well. And yes, there might be times that it's difficult. You know, the old-fashioned idea was people say, well, you stay together for the kids. And now people say, well, no, you don't do that. You know, kids are happy if your marriage is happy. No, kids are happier if your marriage stays together. And part of that heroic commitment is to say, I'm going to take the role of hero, and part of that means that I'm willing to sacrifice something to try to be able to stay in and work on a marriage even when it's difficult, even when it's not rewarding. And you look at that and you say, well, I'm not saying that you justify sin. I'm not saying that you put up with sin or with abuse, but even in that you deal with it, that you address it, that you try to get some kind of counseling, that you try to say, okay, how do we work towards health? And if not possible, then only if there's clear sin, then there's biblical justification. But someone would say, but I'm not in love anymore. Well, love isn't a feeling. Love is a commitment to act, and it's when we act with that commitment of love, then over time, the feeling is a byproduct of the action. You know, think about it this way. How hard did you work to win your spouse? How much did you date each other? How much did you try to be able to do things to be able to romance them? And if you work half as hard now as you did then, I think you would probably feel a lot more in love than you do now. And when you look at this, what you've got to realize is, what is this challenge? It's not just staying in a beat. No, there's something deeper. God's call to us isn't just don't leave your marriage, but it's to be faithful to your vows. Keep your vows. And what was your vow? Your vow wasn't just, I'm going to stay in this till death do us part. That's part of it. But it's also, I vow to love, honor, and cherish. I vow to act in a way that is going to grow this marriage, that's going to love my spouse, that's going to honor my spouse, that's going to cherish them in the actions that I do. So practically that may mean, if you're in the middle of that, you say, how do I deal with it now? Well, if you need to, go to counseling. You know, go and get somebody that's going to help you work through these issues. Seek advice from people. Find someone who's got a great marriage. Find someone who is, when you say, you know, what you want the end of your life to look like, find someone who's there and say, I want what they've got, and then go to them and say, well, how do I get to where you're at? Go get advice. This doesn't come naturally. We need help. We even have things that are available. For, if you don't have this, let us know. We have an online video library that is a great resource, Right Now Media, that's available to each one of you. And again, if you don't have that, call the office. We'll set you up with it. They've got great seminars and things on relationships and on marriage. Well, make a commitment to once a week to watch one of those with your spouse. It will make a difference. See, I'm not trying to downplay the significance of your problems or what your spouse isn't doing or is doing. What I'm saying is that the truth of the Bible is it always speaks to me. It doesn't tell me how I'm supposed to fix my spouse. It tells me how I'm supposed to fix myself. And even if your spouse is 90% of the problem and you're 10, well then, all that God says is how do you fix the 10% that you're responsible for? And leave it up to God. Pray for them. Ask that God would in time speak to them on their issues. And that's part of David's legacy. And so you see a negative and it's a call. I don't want to go down that path. But then if we were to look at the other passage we mentioned in 1 Chronicles 28, we see that there's also a positive story. There were parts of his life that he messed up miserably. And again, I don't want to have that kind of tragic ending like he had. But there were parts of his life that he did it well. And so I want to learn positively from that. And specifically, 1 Chronicles 28 tells us at the end of his life, he was known for living for something greater for himself. And not only that, that he passed that value on. He had a transcendent purpose that he lived and he gave to his children. So let's first of all see this in David, where he lived for something bigger than himself. If you have your Bibles, 1 Chronicles 28. David assembled at Jerusalem all the officials of Israel, and the officials of the tribes, and the officers of divisions that served the king, and the commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, and the stewards of all the property of livestock of the king and the sons, together with the palace officials, the mighty men, and the seasoned warriors. He gets everybody together, and he said, okay, this is what I want everybody to know about the things that value to me, the things that I want to continue to live on. Then King David rose to his feet and said, hear me, my brothers, and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of God, and I made preparations for this building. But God said to me, you may not build a house for my name, for you are a man of war that have shed blood. Yet the Lord God of Israel chose me from my father's house to be a king over Israel forever. He chose Judah as a leader, and in the house of Judah, my father's house, and amongst my father's sons, he took pleasure in me and made me king over all Israel. And all my sons, for the Lord has given me many sons, he has chosen Solomon to be the son that sits on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord God of Israel. And he said to me, it is Solomon, your son, who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. And now it continues on, and if you read what happens, as he describes not only this is what I want to do, but especially then through chapter 29, he said, here's all the preparations I've made. For years I've been setting aside, wealth and money. For years I've been gathering the timber. I've been gathering all the things that you're going to need to build an incredible temple. And he lives this out saying, this is what I've done. And you know what's amazing is that when you look at this, it's not about, it would never be known as David's temple. It'd be known as Solomon's temple that Solomon built. But David wasn't bothered by that because it wasn't about him. It wasn't about his name. He's saying, I know that God put me in this position. And what I want to do is that I want my life to be known for something that is bigger than my name, bigger than my accomplishments. And so I'm going to give my life to invest in building something great, something that transcends the temple of God. And so I've invested all these resources, and he goes to everybody and says, now I challenge you to do the same. And what's amazing is in doing this, although he had sent some bad messages to his sons, this one he conveyed his vision to his children as a heritage. And Solomon got it. Look at verse 9. It says, and to you, Solomon, know that the Lord, the God of your father, and serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all the hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Be careful now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. He says a couple things. First of all, know the God of your father. You know what he's saying here? Solomon, you've seen me live this out. You've seen that this is my God. You've seen this is the God that I worship. You've seen the integrity of this is the reality of me. Yes, you've seen my weakness. You've seen that I've failed in significant ways, but you've seen my love for God. You've seen me repent. You've seen me publicly acknowledge my sins. And you've seen me make him the center of my life. Now, Solomon, you've seen that it's been my father. Now, it's got to be your God. In the same way, you need to acknowledge him. So he says to secondly, and serve him with the whole heart, with a willing mind. Serve him. You know, it's something that you should want to not only do out of duty. It's not religion. It's serve him with your heart, with your mind, with your desire. You know, make it a privilege. Make it a priority. So that you're there, that you're worshiping God. That's something our kids should see with us. That it's not just, well, I have to go to church, but I want to be there. I want to worship God. I want to know him. That I want to make it a priority. I want to make it a priority for them so that when they get older, that's natural for them. When they go away to college or when they have their own family, that it's like, oh, of course I'm going to be in church. Of course I'm going to go to Bible study. That's natural. What does he say? This is something that has to be real. For he asks, for the Lord searches the hearts and understands every plan and thought. He's saying, don't fake it. You know, you can just go through the motions, but God knows that. And you know what? Your kids are going to know that. See, the principle is this. The heritage of a transcendent purpose is caught, not taught. It's not something that I can tell my kids. It's something that I have to show it. It has to be something real to me. And if I live with that kind of value system, they're going to watch that and they're going to catch it. You see, you think about, even beforehand, we said, there's a negative. There was in David's life. There were certain things that his kids couldn't hear because the example was so loud. They pick up what they see more than what they hear us tell them. And that's a negative statement, but it's also a positive statement. Because if I live with those right values, what's going to happen is that they're going to learn from the example that I set for them as well. I think about the blessing that I've had to have a dad who's lived out certain values. And one of the things that has been so interesting for us, we have 6 kids, and we're radically different personality. But we've had some time recently where we've sat around and we've said, we're all different, this, and this, but there's certain values that define us all. We not only all love Christ. There's certain things about hard work, there's certain things about generosity, there's a commitment to evangelism that defines all 6 of us. And you know why? Because my parents lived that out as an example, and I'm blessed with that. He says, not only, live this out, but then he says, then seek the Lord. Verse 9, if you seek him, you'll be found for him, but if you forsake him, he'll cast you off. Seek him. That's not just, you see it happen. Solomon, make this a priority. Make it a priority to seek after him. And then verse 10, be careful now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. Accomplish this purpose. You've seen that this has been my priority. You've seen how I prepared for it. Now make it your priority. Accomplish that purpose. And so I need to be able to not only say that, this is what's true for me, am I living it out for my kids to say, I want to challenge you to live these values out in your life as well, that they become your reality. Now here's the question I've been asked, though, is to say, well, that's great, because he was building a temple, and, I'm not a king, we don't have resources, we're not likely to build a temple. So the question is this, what are the temples that God calls us to build? You might be thinking, this really isn't applicable. We don't have a great temple. If that's what you're thinking, I want to show you from the Bible that you're totally wrong. First of all, I want you to realize that in God's eyes, we should never confuse what's visible and notable with that which is significant and important. And if you're thinking, well, I can't build a great temple, I can't... Okay, let me ask you a question. Biblically, in the period of Christ now, what is the equivalent of a temple? If you're thinking of a church building, that's not the biblical New Testament equivalent of the temple. What was the temple? In the Old Testament, it's where God's presence dwelled. We don't have a temple now after Jesus because the Bible tells us that God no longer dwells in a building, that God dwells in the heart of those who follow after him, those who have a relationship with him. We are the temple of God. The Bible says explicitly that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So what is the closest equivalent to building a temple? A place where God is worshipped and dwelled. I think the closest equivalent is allowing God to use us to lead another person to saving faith in Jesus Christ. Because when we lead someone to saving faith in Jesus Christ, they become a temple. They become a place where God dwells. Now if you're thinking, that's not near as significant. Again, here's where you're confusing visible and notable with that which is significant and important. Let me ask you another question. Where is Solomon's temple now? It's been destroyed for well over 2,000 years. Boy, it was really incredible at the time, but it doesn't exist anymore. Now let me ask you, if God were to lead you to one person is saving faith in Jesus Christ, how long does that impact last? How long will that temple stand? And while you may think that it's not visible or notable, what you've got to realize, when it's not a question of visibility and notability, when you talk about significance and importance, there is nothing that is more significant eternally than leading someone to Christ, a temple that will last forever. See, throughout all eternity in heaven, the grandeur of Solomon's temple will be less than a memory. But the beauty and significance of a soul that is there in heaven in part because you helped lead them to Christ, that will never fade. I think even this past Thursday night, we had a memorial service for Gail Love, and I had the chance to see an example of a life that was well lived, that God used for great things. There was very little about Gail's life that was notable or that the world would say that is great. But for those that were here, it was incredible because person after person got up and talked about how God used this humble but faithful woman to make an eternal difference in their life. One person shared how the family wasn't believers, but Gail would get up and she would pick up the kids and she would drive them. She drove them to church, and because of that, that helped lead her to Christ. Someone else talked about how Gail just shared in the context of work, and she's now a believer because of that. Someone else got up, and I talked with him individually. He didn't share this, but he talked about how that she had built a friendship with them as neighbors, and in that friendship, every year she would say, well, do me a favor and come to church with me on Easter. And he said, I would do that just to make Gail happy, and one year I decided to keep coming. Now that my life is different because of Gail's investment in my life. You know what? We may not think we could do anything great. We're not kings. We're not notable. But all of us can do that kind of temple building. All of us can live that kind of example. All of us can have a life that lasts that way. See, what we need to do, though, is we need to realize that we need to live with the end in mind. We need to start by saying, what is it that I want my life to count for? What do I want it to look like at the end? What do I want to be said about me? What's going to last? Is it the accomplishments at work? Is it the things that I own? Or is there going to be something that you say, here's a difference that this person made in marriage and our kids and our neighbors and our co-workers? Just a couple closing questions just to click in mind. Everyone, what do you want the end of your life to look like? What do you want to be known for? Who do you want to surround you? What do you want those who are closest to say about you? What do you want to be the testimony about what your life mattered for? And second, we've got to realize that it's not just a matter of finding the destination. If we don't know what the destination is, we're never going to get there. But it's not only saying, okay, well, this is what the destination is. We also have to ask the second question. How do we develop a specific strategy, steps that we can take to move us in that direction? What steps can you begin to take this week to move you towards fulfilling these long-term life goals? For some, it might be re-engaging in your marriage. It might be staying in there and just saying, okay, I'm not going to not only give up, I'm going to actually start working on it. For some, it's how do I start to become a better parent? How do I learn how to do this? For some, it's going to be, I've got to stop justifying and excusing the sin that I know that is wrong, that my kids see, and that undermines everything that I'm trying to teach them through my words. For some, it might be, God, help me to realize that you've called me to do something of eternal significance. God, help me to start to look for people in my life that I can build a relationship with, that I can begin to share my faith with, kids in my neighborhood I can bring to church, people that I can invite to Bible study, to a Pacesetters event. God, help me to see who are the people that I can build. Because you know what, at the end of my life, I want to be able to be known that, these were the temples that God used me to build. It wasn't about my name. It was about building something that lasted eternally. That not only did I get to heaven and I realized that God affirms what my life was all about, that it was well lived for His glory, but even those around me that have watched my life say, I want to live out the example that they followed for me, my kids, and for those that are close to me. And I hope and pray that as we look at this, that no matter where we're at right now in life, that we say, you know what, I want to start asking these questions because maybe you've been doing this, but if you haven't, today's the day to start. Say, okay, God, I want to live my life with that kind of intentionality. So that at the end of my life, that God would say to me, well done, good and faithful servant.
Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about what we talked about, Jesus Christ or church, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or by email. The links are in the description.